where do we go from here? We have been on somewhat of a journey over the last 6 or 7 weeks. We've been talking about rising up. We have been talking about crossing a wilderness. We've been talking about becoming filled with the Spirit of God and doing God's work in the world. We've talked about dead bones coming to life. Amazing things in the Old Testament. Today, we talk about the New Testament. But guess what? Our reading that Clara just read for us talks about all of these Old Testament folks. Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, the prophets, everybody. And calls them witnesses. And that because we're in this cloud of witnesses who have had all of this example of the things that they have done by faith, the walls of Jericho, not getting executed in the case of Rahab, going through the Red Sea, all of these things by faith. If we go back to the beginning of that 11th chapter, it is famous as being the faith chapter. It is famous as being the chapter that tells us all of these things, that all of these, they're not all prophets. Some of them are just people of God. Daniel in the lion's den, all these things that have been achieved by faith. Things that seemed impossible. The stories are illustrations, each and every one of them, of the power that we have by our faith in God and by our eyes and our following God and Jesus. The writers of the New Testament, including the writer of Hebrews, which is up for debate as to who that was, they were familiar with Olympic Games. Now, we've had some chat about Olympic Games lately, so they're a little bit on our minds, so hence I bring them to our attention. But the Olympic Games were observed 500 years before the time of the New Testament in Greece. Every city of every size in Palestine had some kind of stadium where athletic contests were held. And among the many games was the foot race. Now, as you can see, I don't do much foot racing. Not much at all. And my knees probably wouldn't allow it. But I can run my own race. I've been in 5Ks and things like that. I can do what I can do. If I have the day free, I can go and do the walk for cancer. You know, each and every one of us has our own race that is set before us. Each and every one of us has the ability to run that race, or walk that race, or wheel down it, whatever we can do. We can do it, all right? As an illustration, this writer dramatizes the need for discipline in the Christian life, in running this race. Paul, in his letters, drew lots of analogies from the athletic games, especially running and boxing, to illustrate the need for discipline and control. Every athlete, and let me digress for a moment. Many of you know that I'm a musician. I consider musicians to be athletes of a sort. Right? We work mostly with small muscles and with our backs. Okay? You know, we don't run so much unless we're in marching band, where once in a while that happens. But everything that requires some sort of activity from us. This analogy for Hebrews is the athlete running the race. Every athlete exercises self-control. Right? Self-control. They do it for the Olympics to receive a perishable medal. At the time of the New Testament, it was a wreath, right? We, as Christians, do not run aimlessly. Paul says, I do not box as one beating the air, but I pummel my body and subdue it, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. What's he talking about here? Kind of convoluted, right? He is saying, I have to look at my own discipline and my own life and make sure that I am following the path that I am preaching to others to follow. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. How often are you going to follow the leadership of someone who is not living that in their own life? You're not. Eventually, you're not. Right? The author of Hebrews has these spectators in the stadium, heroes, Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, Moses, and the prophets. In the galleries, right? So great a cloud of witnesses. These are the people that have run this race before. Now, a witness is not just a spectator, though, are they? A witness is someone who tells the tale of what has happened. Right? A witness in court is supposed to say, what did I see? What happened in this situation? These witnesses have something special to tell us as Christians. They have demonstrated running the race themselves. They have demonstrated following God and following God's will. So these witnesses are more than spectators. They're not somebody up in the clouds that we're going, okay, I'm trying, watch me. No. These witnesses are people that have shown us that this can be done. They are encouraging us. They are helping us. They are saying, look at me. I've done this. But more than looking at me, look at God, because that is how I have done this. There was an Olympic runner, I think it was in the Mexico City Olympics. I'm digressing from what I wrote to say here. It's just something I'm remembering. Who set a record and won. I don't remember whether it was a mile or a marathon or something. What I remember was what he said, because he was a Christian. And he said that for Christians to win their race, they have to keep their eyes on Jesus. You know that old hymn, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus, right? They have to keep their eyes on Jesus. And he said the reason he won his race is because the runner in front of him looked to his right while he was running to see how he was doing, right? And the runner who won, while he was looking to the right, passed him on the left and won the race. His point in that story was keeping focused in whatever it is that is our particular race. The figures up there in the spectator loft, who are telling us the story, they have already run by faith, and they have already won. They endured. They did a marathon, not a sprint. This is a lifetime event, guys. All right? They are there to encourage us and witness to us. One of the things we must do for each other is to witness for each other. Witness to each other. Tell each other the things in our lives that work and that help us. Tell each other the successes in our Christian life as we keep our eyes on Jesus, keep our eyes on the prize, keep the endurance going, and achieve what it is by God's power that we are trying to do. So we're surrounded by these people who have won the race through persistence, patience, suffering, and discipline. Now the verse tells us, lay aside every weight and sin so that we can run the race, right? It says, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely. Another version of that is in your bulletins, actually, using New International Version, because I liked the way it was written out. It says, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. So, one interesting thing about the Greek words that were written for here, and I'm not going to trouble you with trying to pronounce them because I can't do that very well. But the Greek words about and the sin are slightly different than what they sound like in English. First of all, everything that hinders can be a weight, an encumbrance. When we see a runner in the Olympics, they're not like carrying a cart behind them of all their belongings, right? They run with as little clothing as possible. I had one friend who was illustrating this to me and said, "You wouldn't try to run a race with a spider monkey crawling all over you and getting in your way, would you?" And I said, no. I don't know why they had spider monkeys on their mind, but they're little tiny things, maybe 5 pounds, right? But they will get in everything, in your hair, in your clothes, try to pull everything apart. If you're an athlete, 5 pounds might be something you really want to get rid of if it's extra and you're running. But it's not going to cripple your ability to run. It's just going to require more endurance and more strength. But this other distraction, that's going to make a mess, right? But the translation for the word "and" can also be translated as an illustrative word, an illustrative connector. So something like the sin, everything that hinders, by which I mean also the sin that so easily entangles. Okay? It's a lot of times when I was a teenager, I would hear a sermon about this particular verse. And they would always talk about these as different things. Everything that hinders, or all the weight, as different thing than sin. There's some around, come on in. As a different thing than sin. They would say, not all this stuff that hinders is necessarily sin. It might be an extra jacket. It might be that you're reading some romantic novel instead of reading your Bible, right? But, and then there's sin, which might be something really serious, right? But for me, I have to think about that other translation when I go and try to study the Greek part. I look at it and I say, by that I mean also the sin. So he's saying not just this or that, or just this and that, but all the stuff that hinders, by which I mean sins that entangle. And so that led me to say, what is sin? And I've had friends ask me that question. What is sin? So we're in the middle of this story. We're running our race, and we're getting rid of all the stuff that's stopping us. We're getting rid of everything that entangles us, and we're getting rid of sin. Sin is anything, and this is what I tell people when they ask me what I think it is. Okay? You may have a more expansive definition or a simpler one. For me, it doesn't mean I've broken one of the 10 Commandments, although that's in there. It doesn't mean I ate shellfish from Leviticus. Right? What it means is anything that separates me from God. Sin is that which separates me from God and from God's love. Something that is standing in my way. If I am full of resentment about something, I'm hurting myself, and I'm preventing myself from being close to God. If I am doing I have to have my way, not only am I standing in the way of God having God's way, but I'm probably standing in the way of someone else seeing any sort of Christian witness from me if I threw a little tantrum like that. So sin, for me, is that which separates me from God. Now, what does separation from God mean? It means I'm not in the will of God. I'm not hearing God's Spirit. It means I'm not doing God's work. Does that mean I have to spend all of my hours studying the Bible obsessively? Or being out on the street witnessing? Or preaching or teaching? No. It means I do the things that I do with the Spirit of God within me. Some of you are school teachers. Some of you are special ed teachers. Some of you are early childhood teachers. You are doing the work of God with your children. Some of you are mechanics. Some of you are computer wizards. Some of you are retired. Some of you are accountants or in business for yourself. You are doing the work of God within your own work in the community, because we have to have all these things for our community to work. We have to have teachers. We have to have nurses. We have to have mechanics. We have to have people that will take our money when we buy gas. We have to have people that grow the food that we eat, that we buy from the grocery stores or the restaurants, unless we have our own organic garden in our backyard, which I wish I had, but I don't. Hello. So all of these things are things that we have to still be listening to God as we do. I can't tell you how many times if I'm giving a lecture at the university that I have to go, God, give me patience. When yet one more student says, when is my paper due? Well, let's see, it's on the handout, and it's on the blackboard, and it's on the email announcement I sent to you, and it's on the text that I just started. I gave them a special text system. How come you don't know when your paper is due? No. If you will check all the handouts, you'll see that it is due on October 17th. How do I use PowerPoint if they're doing a presentation? Okay. So we have to have patience. Now, I say that because teaching at a university level, I expect students to give presentations. I expect them to know how to use PowerPoint. It's in the syllabus. You have to have computer literacy. If you don't know how to use PowerPoint, you go to the free on-campus tutors and helpers that will help you learn how to use Microsoft Office. Okay? So anyway, it sounds off topic, but it's not. These students, they know some about me. What kind of witness would it be for me to completely lose patience with them and say, just read the syllabus? Would that work? No. They would feel hurt. They would feel like I didn't care about them. And in spite of the fact that they really should have just read the syllabus, it's my job to help them. So, we were talking about weights and sins entangling us. For me, sometimes it's a matter of patience. Yes? Sometimes we have to take a little inventory and think about what are the things that are weighing us down. What is handicapping us? Are we about to just drop out of this race? One of the possible things, and I'm just going to go down a list here, and I'm not saying that any one of you has this particular handicap, but it's a thought. One of those things is faith. If you might have a lack of faith, maybe a lack of courage to respond to God's call to take the road less traveled, shall we say. If you need a coach, read about Abraham. Okay, call him up. Hey, Abraham. Because he went not knowing where he was going. Remember Abraham and his son? Right? Call up Abraham. Read his story. Think about that. We can get some inspiration there. Our faith is an adventure, as was Abraham's. There was a fellow by the name of Clarence Jordan who did some work on Hebrews, some commentary and some translations. And if you turn into an obsessive biblical scholar, you might come across him. He translates faith in Hebrews 11:1 as turning your dreams into deeds. It is betting your life on the unseen realities. Kind of a neat way of putting it, So, if God is calling you, or us, as a congregation and challenging us, we can look at Abraham and we can look to God to help us not only do our own jobs in the community, but also do our jobs here at Bethel, within our community here, reaching out to our community. Perhaps your handicap is depression. People get depressed, discouraged, right? That's sort of a common cold of mental disorders nowadays. People say, oh, it's this kind of depression, right? Who can we talk to if we look at our Bible people? We can look at Elijah, who after destroying all those prophets of Baal was threatened by their sponsor, Jezebel. Remember the story of Jezebel we had a while back? Elijah was so frightened that he ran away, went out in the desert. Then he lay down under a broom tree and just kind of sacked out. Wouldn't do anything. Just laid out there, hiding from everybody, doing nothing. Now, one of the telltale signs is usually that somebody becomes sort of a couch potato. Just sits in a chair all day watching TV or something, right? Lack of self-worth, paranoia, thinking life is meaningless. But what happened? He went into a cave on Mount Horeb, and the Spirit of God, the Word of God, came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah? Listen to me. Go out and do this. Follow through with your mission." And Elijah became one of the most fantastic prophets of the whole Old Testament. God's therapy for him was, go face the wilderness, anoint this king over Syria, anoint this king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, junior Elijah, right? Elisha, to be a prophet. We have to be aware that God has a task for us. And in following through, God will give us that energy to do it. Some people say they can't run this race because they have an immoral past. Maybe they were a prostitute. We talked about the cross and the switchblade story from 30 years ago, which was a story about a man who had a ministry to teenagers, in particular gang members who had spent most of their young lives with knives and chains, and they turned around and became missionaries for Christ. David is the person we can look to here. We know David's story of being an adulterer and a murderer, and yet David was a man after God's own heart. Perhaps you have a thorn in the flesh, whatever that was that Paul had. We're never told quite what it is. For me, it's probably lousy knees, okay? but it could have been poor eyesight. He was struck blind and had to see again. Could have been some kind of chronic illness. Many people suffer from diabetes. God says, "My grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness." That's what he said to Paul. And Paul told the Corinthians about that. So Paul said, I have this weakness, this thorn in my side. But God gives me strength to work through the weakness. Now, I'm not saying that because I have bad knees, I should go run a marathon and destroy them even further. What I'm saying is, when I follow the Spirit of God, the race before me will be the one that's right for me. And as I follow the Spirit of God, I will have the strength to complete that race. By laying aside the weights, the handicaps, the sins that hinder us, we can run the race. How do we do that? Simplistic answer, looking to Jesus. One day at a time. One moment at a time. We can do this. We stay in the moment with God. We stay in the moment with Jesus. And we can do His will. In the ancient Greek stadium, the runner kept his eyes on a stone statue of the Greek god Zeus. That was where they were running to. In the Christian race, we keep our eyes on Jesus. We look there for redemptive power. We look there for the Spirit of God and inspiration. We look to each other for encouragement. As witnesses for each other, we are to help each other, pick each other up along the way, and help each other finish the race. Many of you will remember the story of the runner, I think from Tanzania, who was in the Olympics, 70s, I think. He had been expected to win, but he didn't. He broke his leg partway through the race, but he finished the race hours after everybody else. Most people had left the stadium, but there were still maybe 7,000 left. It was a huge stadium, of course. And they stood and applauded and cheered. And when he was asked, "Why didn't you stop?" he said, "Because my country didn't send me 7,000 miles to start a race. They sent me 7,000 miles to finish a race." So he finished. To me, he gets the gold medal. I mean, no matter what, he put that aside. I don't know the end of the story. I don't know how his leg turned out. I'll try to find out for you for next week. Some of you have maybe heard of Charles Spurgeon. He's a very distinguished English preacher and scholar in the Christian world. He described his own personal conversion in a language that he called the look. He looked at himself and he looked to God, and they became one forever. We look to Jesus as our model of spirituality and morality. The Greek word for look was used to describe an artist and a model. The Christian seeks to imitate Jesus. It takes a lot of forms, but we are to imitate Christ. That is, we are to have the mind of Christ in all humility and in everything that we do. We imitate Christ in love, in purity, in long-suffering, that is patience, in forgiveness, in bearing with the weak, in gentleness and forbearance, in benevolence. Those are from a lot of different verses, mostly Ephesians and Colossians. Okay, but those are, I can tell you later. But here there's one little caveat in imitating Christ and copying Christ for the believer. There are some aspects of Christ that cannot be copied. Christ alone is Redeemer. I am not Redeemer. Okay? Besides, I wouldn't want to get up on that cross. You know the word excruciating for pain? It comes from cross, from crucifixion. Excruciating. From crucifixion pain. That's where that comes from. So, think about that. We are not Redeemer. He is Redeemer. We can copy him in spirit, in love, and humility. We do not imitate Christ to become Christians. We imitate Christ because we are Christians. We look to Jesus for that ultimate victory in this life and the life that is to come. The ancient Greek runners kept their eyes on Zeus, their prize, a perishable wreath of leaves. We keep our eyes focused on Christ, and the prize is permanent. Our victory in this race is assured because Christ was victorious. He endured the cross, despising the shame, and is seated at the right hand of God. Hence, we are, in Paul's words from Romans, more than conquerors through him that loved us. A poet, Isaac Watts, fond memories from my Methodist days, said, "I asked them whence the victory came. They with united breath ascribed their conquest to the Lamb, their triumph to his death." Amen. We are going to sing our